everybody. My name is Jonathan Rideout. I'm here at the funeral home, but also have been asked to gather us together today to reflect and remember on a life that, by all accounts and all writings that I have and all conversations, was well lived in many different areas. And to think it all began right here in this little sleepy town that we all call New Haven. And you know, I was talking to a couple people yesterday, and I said, you know, it's kind of, I see that here. I see a lot of people that go many different directions, many different states, cities, countries even. And whether it's New Haven or Balltown or Mount Washington, everybody comes back home at some point for something. And it's amazing how important to each one of us that the older we get, the more important our home becomes. And I've always been a believer myself that home's where we're at. Home's where we make it, you know. And for Mr. Shoemaker, he had a lot of different homes over time, I understand. And, you know, his final home there at the hospice facility and its assisted living. But then in his heart and his spirit and this shell of his body, New Haven is home and heaven is his home. So now he's home. So today as we open, just to read you the obituary if you haven't had a chance to read it, Hugh Lewis Shoemaker, 83, passed away Monday, August 17th in Reston, Virginia, from complications of dementia. Hugh was born in New Haven, Kentucky on June 26, 1937, and was the oldest of 8 children. Hugh attended the University of Louisville under a Navy ROTC scholarship and graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. He spent 23 years serving this country in the Navy and attended the Navy Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, as well as the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. After retiring from the Navy, he joined E-Systems, which later became Raytheon. He continued managing large security and communication systems projects for various military organizations while he was at Raytheon. Hugh had many hobbies, including woodworking, ham radio, and making and flying remote control airplanes. He was preceded in death by his daughter, Jennifer Shoemaker. He is survived by his loving wife of 60 years, Mary Ann Dickerson Shoemaker. His 3 children, Mike and Tim Shoemaker and Ann Mahoney. 3 brothers and 2 sisters, along with his 2 grandchildren, Teresa and Mitch. Let's have a word of prayer, please. Lord, as we gather here today to remember Mr. Shoemaker, dad, brother, uncle, grandpa, friend. Let's remember not that only that he's passed, but let's remember the life that he did live. And the life that a lot of us now are living because of his life, because of his influence, because of his encouragement, because of his support. Let's remember that today. God bless us today in these moments we have together to remember him. Bless our time together. Bless all of those that have traveled here safely to be with us, and bless them as they return. And God, be with us today and be the unseen guest at this memorial with us today. In your name, amen. I talked to Ann, and her and I have become pretty close over the last week, by email, by phone, by all forms of communication. I don't think we've written letters yet, but we may at some point. And I tried to get a sense of who Hugh Shoemaker was and is. And one thing at the very beginning that I tried to do to get a sense of where we are and what we're doing is, I actually, and most of you have heard this, but I actually made the trip to Virginia from here in a van to pick him up. And a couple reasons I did that. Number one is because this family and you and Mr. Shoemaker, you're my, for this week, you're my responsibility, and you're my heart, and you're my soul, and you're my effort. And I just didn't feel comfortable any other way. I just wanted to make sure he was with me and that he got back to New Haven as safe and as sound as we could get it. I won't say we did the speed limit there and back, but we made it, and we made it safe. I did it for that reason, but the second reason was, in driving and looking around, and I shared this with Kevin and Ann, I uploaded a book to listen to because I'm a musician, but after a while, I get tired of music and I want to do something else. So I uploaded a Civil War book and was listening. I was talking to Kevin. It was amazing to me in my surroundings. I'd be like, they would talk about Antietam or Bull Run, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's right over there. I just passed that, you know. And in being with Mr. Shoemaker, I thought, being a career military man, I never had a conversation with him, but I know that the history of our country and how we are, who we are, and why we are had to be very important to him, or he wouldn't have dedicated his life to serving it and defending it like he did. And so in our time together and in listening to some history with him, that gave me a sense of who he was and how he lived his life and where he eventually settled there in the middle of a part of our country that is so rich, not only in the operations of our country today, but in the history of our country and who we are today. And so that's how this journey began. And then I asked Ann to talk to me a little bit about, who was your dad? What did he do? What was important to him? And I want to tell you what I came up with just as late as last night. If I had to myself get a stone and put it on the grave of Mr. Shoemaker, and they only gave me one word I could put on there beside his name, that word would be faithful. And the reason being, in everything, and I'm going to share with you a few stories that Ann shared with me, but in everything I could look at and everything I could read, from his life here in New Haven with his family to his life with his wife, now of 60 years, to the paths that his children have taken and his grandchildren, to that career service with his country in such a vital, important role, you know, rising all the way to be captain. That word is faithful. Hugh was faithful to his family, faithful to his country, and he was faithful to this community. So that's what I want you to think about today as we spend this time together, is Hugh being faithful. What impact did that have on your life? And I know it had an impact, or you wouldn't be sitting here with us today. You wouldn't have driven across the country to be here with us today. You wouldn't have flown across this country to be here. You wouldn't have cared to get up if you lived a mile away and come and be here to support this family if you didn't recognize Hugh and his faithfulness in his life. You know, Ann had told me that he was the oldest of 8 children, which for me, coming to New Haven, I'm not from here, but when I started coming to this community, I swear if you don't have at least 10 children, you're not from here. That's just the way it is over here. So I was a little blown away that he was only one of 8. Nonetheless, having 8, that blows my mind. I can't imagine. Most today, 2 or 3 kids, everybody's freaked out.
They're really 9,
but one passed. So really 9. So he almost made the 10. I think after 5, you probably just start taking care of each other, and you have no idea how many. You just take care of each other. But if you can imagine this, in the day where we all have our own bedrooms, bathrooms, and you don't want anybody in either one of them, they lived in a 2-bedroom home and with 1 bath. And that home was just a stone's throw away from here down by the railroad tracks.
But it did have an indoor bathroom.
But it did have an indoor bathroom, which is very important.
That's important.
Thank goodness. And I see brothers going, yes, thank you. Their dad he owned a blacksmith shop, one of his number of jobs that he had growing up. Then he got a job with the government, which helped with his family situation, their finances, and their well-being. And said that Hugh had many stories of growing up in New Haven. And trust me, like I said, I haven't been here that long, and I already have a bank of New Haven stories. So I can only imagine the stories that Hugh must have had about this town. One of them is he told his kids about putting pennies on the train tracks to see how they would bend once a train ran over them. And he often talked about the popcorn factory across the street. I see the ones that remember shaking heads, others like me are going, popcorn factory in New Haven. We're still trying to process that.
That's still pain.
He and at least one of his brothers, and I say that because there are no names, it says at least one of his brothers, shucked the popcorn off the cob and spent many afternoons eating popcorn off of spread out newspapers. Oh, to be so simple again, and to enjoy those kind of things. Another story is that somehow, and again, it does not give details, I don't want to know details, but Hugh managed to get 2 car hoods.
Oh, yeah.
And he welded them together to make a boat for he and his brother to sail the Salt River.
No, the something Fork River.
Rolling Fork, not Salt River. He didn't graduate from the Salt River. Rolling Fork
Weighed
River.
about 1,000 pounds.
I was going to say, you probably could have sailed the Atlantic Ocean. It's probably a 1,000-pound boat. But imagine that. People like me, Mitch, you got to think about that. We run down to Walmart and get a kayak if we want to sail, or we pay somebody to go on a cruise. Back then, they did what they had to do to make a good time,
That's
too.
what you became a sailor.
There you go. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure if I had to sail on car hoods if I would have ever wanted to be in the Navy, but evidently that made quite an impression. Hugh and his brother Dickie both had an interest in electronics and ham radios. They both studied Morse code and went to Louisville and passed the test to become ham radio operators.
You didn't know there wasn't anything.
I did not know there was a ham radio operator school out there, but now I do.
Does anybody recognize K4KO?
Yeah.
And K4 Ken or something?
Yeah, all right. Those were their call sign. Okay, all right.
One of them still has it.
Really? That's awesome.
No, my dad's is still valid too.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
That's great. See, things like that, I love to hear because we're so caught up in these things that we've lost a lot of that stuff. Hobbies, it's true hobbies, not sitting in front of a screen and pushing buttons and playing with friends across the country on a game, but true hobbies and things that prepared you for life. They taught you something. You actually learned from your hobby. I mean, those two things right there, we joke about building a boat and the Morse code and the ham, but Hugh used all of that. I mean, he spent his life.
they use their
And-
Morse code to cheat in cards.
Oh, my
Alright. Side note.
Wait, you said you were gonna be nice today.
Yeah.
That's
Side note, if nobody heard that, for those in the other room, we use Morse code to cheat in cards. So if you've ever lost money in a card game, you may want to take that up with them after. Yes, take it up with Dick. But they actually retrofitted an old outhouse and made it into their ham radio studio. Is the best way I could tell you. A radio shack. They were the first radio shack. Hugh went to Catholic high school in Bardstown, and this is amazing to me. He had such a passion, he actually thumbed his way back and forth to get a ride back and forth to Bardstown. I don't know about you all, but my generation and these next generations, we've never thought about that. It's just been as easy to stay home and not go, or go to somewhere, but that was important to you.
Well, my dad didn't have a car until 1967.
Wow.
So I used to thumb back and forth to Bardstown to get chicken for my mother.
Wow.
And right, whoever, it didn't matter who picked you up, you just rode them.
Yeah, it was safe.
With
then,
chickens.
right?
With chickens.
With chicken.
Right. Yes. You weren't afraid back then like we are today. But, and this was back when 31E from Bardstown was just 2 lanes and you had curves going every which way.
Wheels.
And there was a certain man that always picked up Hugh in the afternoon, the story tells me from Ann, picked him up and dropped him off in New Haven. One day that same man drove past Hugh and didn't pick him up for some reason. And Hugh evidently became annoyed because he got passed by, but eventually somebody else picked him up. And I want to break right there because we're getting ready to learn an important lesson about everything, even today. There's a reason we're all here. We may not know it, and it probably will go beyond just memorializing Mr. Shoemaker, but there's a reason we're all here today. So even though he was annoyed, Hugh was picked up by somebody else. And during that ride, Hugh came up on one of those turns and looked over and saw the man that normally picked him up had wrecked and was dead in that ditch. So somebody that day was looking out for Hugh. It wasn't Hugh's time. And Hugh was annoyed, but I'm going to bet you right at that moment, Hugh said a little prayer. There was a reason Hugh wasn't in that car. More recently, Kevin wanted to share with us that once Hugh moved into the assisted living, they would come and take them out for dinner once a week or so. And every time they were driving around, Hugh would be amazed by the beauty of the clouds. Again, something simple. But he was amazed. He'd never seen such beautiful clouds and the amazing sunsets. All the airplanes heading out, in and out of Dulles Airport, which was just a mile from where he lived. He always said that Mitch would be flying one of those planes. And I don't know if he was putting the pressure on Mitch or was a fortune teller or what was going on, but Mitch now being a flight instructor, I hear, and wants to be a pilot, and picked up his hobby of flying and building remote control airplanes from his grandpa, which again is so cool. It's not something on an iPad or a phone. It's something that, you know, he shared with Mitch. One day Mitch can share with his kids. It's something that people can do together, which is, to get off, I'm not getting on a soapbox, but a lot of what we're lacking today is all of us working together for good. And that was one of those things. And finally, she shared, for those of you that don't know, he had a daughter killed in a motorcycle accident when she was 25. And Jenny had a close, special relationship with Hugh. And possibly because she was born later than, you know, Ann and the boys, and maybe he had settled and chilled out a little bit by then and had less stress in his life. But they were best buddies. And as I can imagine, and is written here, that loss was one of the most devastating things that ever happened to you. And I tell people all the time in this business, I hope I never have to experience it. But there's never a loss like a child. Doesn't matter how old you are, even at your all's age now, if your dad was living and lost one of you, You're still his 5-year-old Ann. You're still his 10-year-old Mike. You're still their baby. In fact, someone once told me that when you lose a spouse, you're called a widow. When you lose a parent, you're called an orphan. There's no name for losing a child because there's no words. And that stuck with me forever. So Hugh endured that. But at the same time, Ann says, she was at his house with Kevin and her 5-week-old baby. And at some point, Hugh came to her when Teresa was in her lap, and he was crying and sad, but at that moment realized that God had finally sent him something to ease the pain of losing his daughter. And folks, today, we can all learn from that. That God never promises every day is going to be easy, and he never promises all doors are going to be open. But when he does close a door, he'll open another one for you. And he's closed the door, and this chapter of Hugh's life is over. But there are other doors out there that are opening for you. You know, there are other opportunities beyond today that God will bring before you because he's chosen to take you. I want to take a break before we conclude and ask if is there anybody that would like to add to any part of Hugh's life? I know we sort of did that along with each other, and thank you for that. Y'all took a lot of pressure off of me by interacting. Is there anybody else that would like to share something brief with us? Okay. Before we close, I told you that I wanted to talk about the one word that I felt like described Hugh from what I gathered. And I know you all have many other words and many other stories. But that word to me was faithful. And I found a couple passages of scripture that I want to share with you today. One comes from Proverbs, the 28th chapter. And it said, "A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished." And I thought about that. 20 plus years in the Navy, 60 plus years with a wife, losing a daughter, raising children, moving, I just heard a few, California, Florida, wherever else, Virginia, you all moved around. Hugh was faithful. And Hugh may not have appeared to be, but if you look at the big picture, Hugh was pretty persistent and patient. And he was showered with many blessings because of that. The other scripture that I picked out comes from the book of Luke, the 16th chapter. And it said, "One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. One who's dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you've not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with the true riches? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" And I thought about that when I was reading Ann's stories about the converted outhouse, the sewn together, the welded together car hoods for boat, and everything else that he did, eating the popcorn on the newspapers with his brothers. Those were the days of, as you all would know more than me, those were the days of probably very little. Those were the days of thumbing a ride to Bardstown to get chicken to bring back to your mom. Those were the days of not having a car. Those were the simple days. Hugh was faithful during those days. He wasn't perfect, none of us are, but he was faithful during those days. So the Bible promised Hugh that if he was faithful in little, he could be faithful in much. And in looking at Hugh's life, imagine the things he's seen, all the travels throughout his military career, all the people he's had a chance to meet, all of the security, cool things that he's done that only some of us dream about. Hugh was given then much to be faithful with. He graduated from being faithful with a little. We closed today. I don't know if you picked up one of these. Ann and I also talked about military a little bit, not much. One of the memories I had was, and you'll hear today, the military, the Navy will be at the cemetery with us. I always remember my grandfather talking about being stationed in Virginia and, you know, having a wife and young children at home, just like many of you did, as Hugh did. And he said the only time it really bothered him was he'd be laying alone at night in his bunk, look out that window and see the flag, and that bugler would blow taps. And he said, never in my life did everything else in my life and in my mind stop and grab my attention, grab my focus, and made me think about my wife, made me think about my children, made me think about the country that I was sacrificing to serve his taps. So in the folder, I actually Googled, and the song Taps is one of many that came from the Civil War. And the song Taps actually has words to it. And I'm going to close with this as we say farewell to Hugh today. Day is done, gone the sun. From the lakes, from the hills, from the sky, all is well, safely rest. God is nigh. Fading light dims the sight, and a star gems the sky. Gleaming bright from afar, drawing nigh, falls the night. Thanks and praise for our days. Neath the sun, neath the stars, neath the sky. As we go, this we know. God is nigh. Let's pray. Lord, thank you again for this time together. Thank you for the life of Mr. Shoemaker. Thank you for what he meant. Thank you for his service to his family, to his country. And God bless us as we go to the cemetery today to say our final goodbye. And bless us, take those that have traveled safely home.